Hey, folks, welcome. A Saturday edition of Club E. Want to thank our Club E sponsors, irishtitan.com. Irish Titan is an e commerce and digital strategy agency. Boulay Group, and their website, Boulay is spelled Boulay group.com. Boulay Group is a CPA and consulting and advisory firm. And in the environment we're in right now, definitely a plus to be working with a good accountant. Highland Bank is a family owned community bank, another longtime Club E sponsor. And then minnesotasales.com. And the website is mnsales.com. One of our prior speakers on Club E, Scott Plum, presented the other day. Minnesotasales.com works with business owners and executives and helping them sell more. And in the environment we're in right now, that's what everybody is talking about. And then lastly, the Network Connect. Network Connect is a platform for providing services for connecting and catalyzing businesses, connecting you with other businesses, money, employees that you might be searching for, what have you. So the networkconnect.com is our last Club E sponsor. And with us today is Paul Johnson. Welcome, Paul.
Thanks, Rick, and great to be here and with you and all of your viewers today.
Great. Thanks for joining us, Paul. Paul is the Executive Vice President and Partner at Superior Brokerage Services. They're primarily known as SBS, again, Superior Brokerage Services, and they're a single source of end-to-end 3PL services. For folks out there who maybe don't know what the 3PL acronym is, it's third-party logistics. They handle the logistics and supply chain management, and they do things like distribution, warehousing, and fulfillment. The website for Superior Brokerage Services is SBS-international, shortened intl.com, SBS-intl.com. And first, before we dive into things, Paul, tell us a little bit about yourself and background of the firm.
Sure. I've been with SBS since 2003. Prior to that, I worked kind of on the more on the shipper or the shipper side of the business for some time at Gander Mountain, also at Best Buy. So my background is primarily in the logistics, freight forwarding, customs brokerage side of things. And as we've developed the company was founded in 1994. We're privately held, headquartered here in St. Paul, Minnesota, and we've steadily grown our U.S. footprint over the past 5 years to now where we have facilities in Seattle, Tacoma, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, Phoenix, El Paso, Atlanta, and New York. And then we use primarily a agent-based network for our global partners overseas.
Okay. And then overseas, do you have specific parts of the world that you specialize in?
Well, yeah, we're heavily focused in Asia. Probably about 65 to 70% of our business either originates from Asia or is destined to Asia. And then Europe, kind of shoring up the balance of that. Europe, Middle East, Australia would shore up the balance of our business, both
Okay.
inbound and outbound.
All right. Great. Well, again, thank you very much for joining us. Before
Mhm.
we dive into the event here today, I've been asking folks that we've been talking to, what are you doing to try to stay healthy and sane during this at-home period?
Well, a couple things. I mean, we have been fortunate in Minnesota in the spring to have a fairly, decent spring weather-wise. There's been some warm temperatures out there, so I've been able to get outside, spend some time just walking around the neighborhood, touching base with neighbors that either I haven't talked to in a while or haven't even met. So that's been kind of nice. And of course, my garage is the cleanest it's ever been. I think since we moved into the house. Also, I think another big thing on the mental side is just we've as a result of the conditions we've had this opportunity to kind of slow our pace down.
Yep.
and be a little bit more reflective in our time, with peace and quiet. And so, in a lot of ways, that's been very positive.
Yeah, good, good. Well, um, knowing you for as many years as I have, and for our listening audience, Paul and I go way, way back. Great friend over the years, but knowing Paul, knowing you and your wife, I'm sure your house and your garage are looking quite nice after this stay-at-home period. So,
Yeah, we'll see how long it lasts.
all right. So, as we go into our event here, I wanted to talk a little bit about how our audience can participate and what they can receive for that participation. So, Paul and the fine folks at SBS are going to provide an assessment of your value and supply chain. At a high level, what they're going to do is look at your business model and how it translates into your supply chain. So an objective way to try to determine if there's any cost savings or cost recovery opportunities. So, for example, on the cost recovery side, with the 25% additional tariffs from China, there may be an exclusion opportunity for importers to apply for refunds on those duties. And for example, SBS has secured refunds totaling $15 million for accounts like Polaris, Toro, Pentair, and Graco. So again, one way for you to benefit from today's talk is to cost recovery of some of your tariffs that you're paying. Another way is for Paul and SBS to do a sampling of the invoices that you've paid into the supply chain to see if there's any overcharges on your agreed upon rates. So that additionally is a way to save a significant amount of money. And how do you participate in this today? Which is to put in hashtag supply chain right there into the comments field. Ask any questions that you have, and we'll do a drawing and pick 3 of the folks that did hashtag supply chain. And Paul and SBS will do an evaluation and try to figure out if there's any low hanging fruit for you all to save money into your supply chain. All right. So, with that, let's go into our event. And the big question that everybody wants to know is, why can't they find any toilet paper at their grocery store?
Well, I got to admit, when we first were kicking around that topic, I had to scoff a little bit because of just all of the, I guess, social media buzz around toilet paper jokes, and the media has certainly picked up with that story and run with it. But in just kind of taking a look at it, and just doing a little bit of research in terms of, believe it or not, toilet paper, I ran across some facts that back in 1973, during the Arab oil embargo, we had a very similar situation with toilet paper. For those of you that were around back in 73, maybe you'll remember the great toilet paper shortage of 1973. Um, Economically, we were, as I said, in the oil embargo, and there was constraints all over the place in our economy. There were shortages, obviously, of fuel, long lines at the pumps, shortages of electricity. And as it turns out in this story, there was a congressman, a US congressman in the state of Wisconsin, that was probably well connected to the paper mills, and was pumping a story about shortages of paper in the Wisconsin area or nationwide. And as it turns out, Johnny Carson, late night TV host, picked up on that and made uh, you know made fodder of it for his nightly stand up, in which then the media picked up on it, and it became, basically it perpetuated from there, all based on really kind of suspect sources of information. So I thought that was amusing that, in this country we've actually had another toilet paper crisis. I definitely wasn't aware of that until earlier this week.
Well, interesting that Johnny Carson pushed that. And for those of you out there who are old enough to remember, definitely what he said was gold. The media jumps on it. So, actually, similar to what happened in this period, which is the media definitely grabbed it and then it ran. And then everybody probably has, 6 months worth of toilet paper down their basement that they're going to be working through. So,
Yeah,
anyway.
it's just a, kind of fast forward to, 2020 and really what's, how, how is this really, is it really a supply chain issue, I guess was kind of my question, or is it more of the, kind of what took place back in the 70s? And, as I read into it, it truly is a supply chain issue from the fact that, um, I didn't know this, but the both the sales and distribution channels for toilet paper are split between the consumer and the commercial markets, and there are very distinct and defined channels that, when you think about it, somebody threw a number out that there's been a spike of 40% demand on the domestic side or the consumer market,
Oh,
um, as a result of just more people staying at home and not going out. Conversely, on the commercial side, you've probably got warehouses across the country of that lovely one ply sandpaper toilet paper that are not moving. So, in you can imagine the market for toilet paper in general. It's high volume, low revenue, low margin, and these what would seem to be a very basic kind of benign supply chain, um, turns out it's fairly well designed and well orchestrated, and any disruptions like a 40% spike in demand is really going to throw it into a tizzy.
yeah.
So
So you could probably take any consumer product and say 40% spike, there's going to be supply challenges.
exactly.
So taking that and that learning and dovetailing into what's going on right now, what does a pandemic actually tell us about the underlying issues in a global supply chain?
It's a great question, and really, I think on a more serious level, what we're learning with the PPE and the medical equipment is really how intricate and to a certain extent, um, less transparency into these critical things. Excuse me, guys, that have really um, kind of uncovered a lot of gaps and really brought to the public, in the news media stories, just how delicate and intricate a lot of these supply chains are, and vulnerable, definitely vulnerable.
Yeah. So speaking of being vulnerable, what do you see as the most vulnerable parts of the global supply chain?
Um, so what what you see are, things that have really kind of built over the course of the last couple decades, and I've been in this business long enough to go back to 9/11, and really, that wasn't necessarily a supply chain manifestation of our weaknesses, but what it did was it changed the course of, obviously air transportation, um, security, global security. It spurned obviously the Department of Homeland Security, and going back to that time period, prior to that, it was, you know, the global markets were very freewheeling in terms of the deals that were being cut overseas, the manufacturing that was being established. China became part of the WTO early in the 2000s, and so it was very, like I say, it was very entrepreneurial, very freewheeling. And then as we begin to layer in security requirements around our supply chain, it added a level of complexity that businesses, services that, in terms of logistics and warehousing and international, um, really had to change their practices to be able to manage the information better, and provide a lot more detail to customs. So that, as I said, it kind of started the ball rolling, so to speak, in terms of making our supply chain obviously more secure, but at the same time added that level of complexity.
Sure.
Um, along the lines of labor disputes in the United States. I don't, some of your viewers may have gone through port strikes that have occurred multiple times over the last 10 years, particularly in Los Angeles and on the West Coast. So, union contract renegotiations brought ports to a halt in on the West Coast, Seattle, Tacoma, Los Angeles, Oakland, and those are major hubs for inbound cargo from Asia. And it really locked down supply chains for a period of 2 to 3 weeks, and then that had ripple effects, that extended months and quarters actually. So that's another example of just vulnerabilities, unforeseen events that can really disrupt business. Another situation a little bit more recently, obviously, is we're seeing on the ocean carrier side a lot of consolidation of carriers, and so they we about 3 years ago we saw a major Korean carrier by the name of Hanjin go bankrupt. They were obviously subsidized by the Korean government. Korean government had two major global players in the ocean cargo market, and they chose one, and Hanjin was not the one. And as a result, that was another situation where Hanjin had about 6% of the market share for global container movement at the time. So that capacity immediately shrunk. You were having vessels getting seized with cargo, with shippers' cargo on the vessels, and it was just again another nightmare situation, very similar to the port strikes, where if you had cargo on Hanjin ships, you were out of luck. And so it's labor disputes, carrier consolidations, attempting to basically reduce capacity and gain profitability in a very capital intensive industry. Uh, 2 years ago, it was in the U.S. trucking market. It was driver shortages. There weren't enough drivers on the road to be able to haul the loads that were required. And that was at the time a very serious issue in terms of how it impacted trucking rates in the United States. And then obviously most recently, trade wars. So the additional tariffs that were imposed by our current administration, going on 2 years, and what that has done, not only financially to importers that are buying product from China, but also everything around that in terms of um, how they are keeping track of when these tariffs have been imposed, what the exclusions are. It is, you know, when you hear the stories in the media, I mean, everybody can kind of understand the magnitude of a 25% tariff, but how they're implemented and what they're implemented on and in what schedule, it's just put a lot of onus on business to be able to manage through this in a very, now especially a very challenging time economically.
Yeah, challenging and very complicated. So, in
Mm.
a complicated situation, it's always easy to try to have a silver bullet or a magic bullet, kind of one thing. Hey, if we do this, it's going to solve all of our problems. So, in this situation with the supply chain, is technology, things like automation and AI, that sort of silver bullet for improving the inefficiencies?
It will continue to improve inefficiencies and really, I think, build more transparency into historically what has been a very fragmented market, especially when you're talking about multi-mode transport, some very complex manufacturing operations that are run literally all over the globe. So what you are seeing is continued steady improvement in visibility, in planning, manufacturing and production schedules, product development. All of those things have been boosted with technology, as well as just kind of your basic transactional trade data. It's there's a lot more visibility to that information today than there ever has been, and there's a lot of different ways that businesses can go about, obviously obtaining that information and using it, leveraging the data. Um, and that brings with it its own set of concerns. But tech is particularly in the areas of AI and automation. Um, some your viewers may have heard or read about driverless vehicles. There is that will be a thing in the United States in the not too distant future. I think one of the things with technology now is we're basically in a reset mode as a result of the pandemic. So it's going to be interesting to see how much capital goes to continues to go to development of tech related solutions and capabilities around the supply chain.
Well, certainly more looking forward than there was a month and a half ago, because the whole world is now looking at the supply chain as a major issue,
Mhm.
especially and including the folks that maybe didn't give that as much concern. But there's nothing like a toilet paper shortage to open everybody's eyes. So, a reminder for folks that want to ask Paul questions, please do so online. And then if you do hashtag supply chain, you can be in a drawing to have one of three assessments of your own supply chain, looking for ways to save money on tariffs that you may have paid and rebates on those, or overbillings that you might be seeing from some of the folks in your supply chain. And Paul and the kind of people at SBS will help you with that. And a reminder to learn more about SBS. The website is SB as in boy, S dash INTL.com, short for international.com. So SBS dash INTL.com. So, Paul, as organizations look to work around constraints, how might they do that and improve their own supply chain?
And I think I look at this as kind of my soapbox moment here in terms of the discussion. And knowing the conditions that we're operating in now and going to continue to have to operate in for the foreseeable future. Um, for me, it's recommendations are really let's go back to the basics within your organizations. And what I mean by that is if you think of all of the areas within your organization or within a shipper's organization or anybody that moves product or goods around the globe, um, almost every single functional area in an organization has influence over the performance of a supply chain. And our experience at SBS has been, we engage with clients to really one of the things that we try to do is develop a cross-functional view of our customer supply chains because everybody is dealing with certain parts of it, but as a whole, I think what we see very frequently is different departments have different ways of understanding their supply chain and may not necessarily um, completely understand other areas. Something as simple as asking a customer, what are your terms of sale with your supplier base in Korea? Um, that can be a very difficult question, as an example, for a lot of people in a company to answer. They're not involved with procurement or sourcing, they don't know. But yet, something as basic as terms of sale have implications with finance, um, really, legal. So it's, as I say, back to the basics is one of the ways that you can work around or through inefficiencies is really to understand your own supply chain at a much deeper level. How do you do that? Mapping exercises, engaging that cross-functional group within your organization to just have a regular sit down meeting occurrence where you begin to map out end to end um, what your supply chain is, even at a fairly high level. Sometimes there are discoveries that um, can be made in that process that are really enlightening and would enable obviously further investment, capital investment in projects or resources that you would be able to um, improve your supply chain. So it's fundamentally, sitting down and doing a mapping exercise. All you're investing there is time, and I can pretty much guarantee that there will be findings coming out of that that would ultimately lead to better performance and or financial improvement overall.
Okay. Couple of questions coming in from the audience. So thank you for your participation. Again, hashtag supply chain to go in the drawing to receive an assessment from Paul and SBS. First question is from Sam R. And he wants to know how a COVID-19 vaccine maker could distribute 350 million vaccines efficiently.
Uh, that's a great question, and obviously one that will likely need to be answered. And I think the answer is it really depends on who that um, party is that has the vaccine, where they're located in around the globe, and or in the United States, I guess if we're looking at the United States. Um, it that is one that I think would require some significant amount of thought to how that is going to be executed.
Yeah,
It-
that
be
would definitely be a big task.
Mhm.
All right, so here's another question from Julie. Julie wants to know, is there been something that has happened over the last month or so that was enlightening to you or that you hadn't thought of before or something that just made the light bulb go on for you?
Well, there's a couple for me. There's a couple different takes on that. From running a business side, um, it has obviously caused everybody in our company to look inward, and as a result of that, I think Rick, you in one of your prior posts, you mentioned doing a 13-week projection of cash flow, right? Something very basic, and along the lines we've done that, and what comes out of something like that is obviously we're trying to lean out our organization, and balance that with um, the recovery relief that is available from the federal government, but then once we got through that, I think what it also some takeaways from it were there are some very, again, very basic practical things that we can do within the business to shore up, some revenue opportunities as a result. On a on a more kind of macro level, I think the enlightening thing, and still a little bit fearful, honestly, for me, is how fragile supply chains are, and how, I guess, preparedness, particularly when it comes to disaster relief or things like that, where within an organization, that's been a back burner thing, for a lot of companies, including us. And we've been fortunate so far to be flexible enough to get ahead of the curve in terms of having as much of our staff working remotely. That worked very well. But I think it's going to make us much more cognizant moving forward, um, when it appears that we are going to be at risk of recurring situations like that as we move forward.
Yep. So you've talked a couple times about A, the complexity of the supply chains, B, how those multiple stages, C, that it's international. So there's all these layers of risk. And then you have the fact that a company doesn't actually own and manage all this stuff themselves. They have all these outside parties, and then you have all kinds of challenges associated with those. So, how do organizations try to manage the supply chain data and the process? And what are some ways that they might mitigate their risks?
Mhm. And that's again another kind of soapbox moment for me with that question is the first thing that organizations should do is really understand who owns their data when it comes to the supply chain. And when you think about, IPR, when you think about, your purchase orders or your sales contracts, all of that information, is now or has been for a while, part of the data flow within a supply chain. And, I look at the sensitivity around our clients' data along those lines. And, you have to make sure that whoever you are hiring, whether it be, a warehouse, 3PL, truck, even a trucking company, your international freight forwarders and customs brokers, literally any service provider in the supply chain, one of the things that you need to be certain of, or at least ask the question is, who owns the data that um, really is yours, and how accessible is it? And what are their service providers' procedures for encryption, backup, prevention of cyber threats as a result of hacks. We've seen, I guess, in the last week actually, an ocean carrier by the name of MSC, Mediterranean Shipping Company, which is top five in terms of market share globally. 2 weeks ago, had their entire shipping portal taken down for approximately 3 days.
Wow.
And that is critical, mission critical, obviously from a transaction standpoint. And then the underlying data that is in there, in those portals, is very sensitive, and it is in many cases, legally, there that information is not public for a reason. There's pricing and many other things in there.
Yeah.
So it's who owns your data, um, how accessible is it, what are the measures that your service providers are taking to protect it, and then ultimately, um, can you do you as an organization have the capability to build a data warehouse or reservoir to hold the different levels of data within your own organization and then from your outside providers, that really tells the story of your supply chain, both from a historical reporting standpoint, backward looking, for the analysis and analytics that go around that, and then also, again, as we get further down the road with AI and analytics around, something now that we're seeing that really has become commonplace is tools like Power BI just sitting on top of a data warehouse that allow you to piece together all of this very varied sources of information to help you do the analysis on your supply chain.
So I'm going to ask you to get out your crystal ball, which I know is challenging, especially here in Minnesota. You try to figure out what the weather's doing, and you're always wrong. So as you look forward, um, when do you think the supply chain, because of the pandemic, is going to calm down? What do you think needs to happen for that to occur? And then what does a new normal look like? So
Mhm.
again, I'm asking you to look forward a little bit. We're not going to hold you to it, but just gives folks a little bit of idea of what they might expect to see in the future.
Yeah, it's been interesting over the last 6 to 8 weeks, because our business is so heavily weighted to Asia. So we were watching China, our partners in China, go through this, really 2, 3, 4 weeks ahead of what was going on in the United States. And um, so, a lot of talk about flattening the curve and continuing, the quarantine and, stay at home. Um, Obviously, I think there's a case that can be made in what we see in the data there that those types of measures need to be in place, to prevent, I guess, just the perpetuation of the virus. And with China, albeit we may not have seen the complete picture there, they were able to come out of it, when after a month of quarantine and begin operating again. So we're seeing, their ability to go back to manufacturing and shipping and all of the activities that you know they perform, but yet it cascades forward to the rest of the globe. So I think it's just going to be a period of time, that every country on every continent is just going to have to continue to go through and just be very careful and very selective in terms of what starts up first, and then looking at the impacts, as a result of reopening certain segments of business or industry. And then we kind of get to a leveling, um, and I think really what you know I really, putting a time frame on it. I mean, I know from the standpoint of how we're looking at it from a financial planning piece, we're looking at a 2-year period of very, very difficult, challenging times. And
From
we're
a supply chain standpoint.
from a supply chain standpoint, but again, also running the business as a service provider. We've just got to be, as lean as we possibly can be, and not sacrifice any of the relationships with the clients in terms of being there for them. But yeah, from a supply chain standpoint, for sure, probably 18 months to 24 months. I mean, there is activity. I mean, we continue to operate, um, at a, I guess, fairly slow level, but there is activity. And it's also, I think, spurning you know a lot of other creativity around, um, just how to do business again in this environment, particularly with the companies that are shut down and unable to operate because they're not essential.
Yep. Okay. So two last things again to connect up with Paul. Again, Paul, thank you for joining us today. But to connect up with Paul, you can visit the SBS website. That's SB as in boy, S-INTL.com. So SBS International is the name of the business. Lastly, any closing thoughts, perspectives, kind of words of wisdom you want to share with our audience today?
Mhm. Well, I appreciate just the opportunity to do something a little bit different, and you know, never in my wildest dreams would I have imagined that we would be discussing anything remotely like the situation that we're under. But it, in the same respect, it you know, we've been through difficult times before, and it's just trying to gain some perspective from the standpoint of learning, learning as we come out of it, and maybe, as a result of that, we can we can build in a very, I guess, tragic situation in many respects, um, to be better prepared for situations like this, so that um, they won't disrupt them quite as badly as they have, you know, right now.
Sure. Well, again, want to thank our sponsors, irishtitan.com, Boulay, that's Boulay group.com, the CPA and advisory firm, Highland.bank, a family owned community bank, Minnesota Sales, website is mnsales.com, and the networkconnect.com, our wonderful group of sponsors for Club E. So thank you very much. And again, Paul, appreciate you being here
Yeah.
today. Be safe. Good luck with the business, and look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Thanks a lot, Rick. I appreciate it.
Yep. Take care.